Well, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome back for another virtual concert. Nice to have you with us. Tonight's performance, if you did not see the announcement on Facebook, is entitled Dancing Through the Years. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of different music associated with historical dances from the 1800s, probably on up through about the World War II period, and the jitterbugs. That's about where my musical knowledge stops, most of the time. And so, starting out with some of the very earliest popular ragtime tunes, the dance of the 1890s that became all the rage was called the cakewalk. That first tune was at a Georgia camp meeting, written by Carey Mills, the same man who wrote a couple of famous pieces of music, Meet Me in St. Louis and Red Wing. And I thought I'd play another example of an early cakewalk for you. And this is also written by Carey Mills, Frederick A. Mills, that was his full name. And this is a tune that's been a favorite of mine for years. And apparently it was also very popular with the John Philip Sousa Orchestra. At a Georgia camp meeting was written in 1897, this one in 1899. Whistling Rufus. Thank you so much. There's Whistling Rufus, a cakewalk from 1899. Now, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, going to try and explain to you how to do all the different dances that go along with tonight's music. I'm just going to play the songs and tell you the name of the, the dance that goes with it. I'm always happy to take requests too. I don't necessarily have to stick entirely to the theme. I'm so glad someone suggested doing this, though. I can't believe that I haven't thought of doing a night of songs devoted to dance music. Ragtime was, of course, very popular in the early 1900s, primarily as dance music. So that's why I'm starting out with some rags. And I thought I'd play you another one by the king of ragtime writers, just to show that he wrote dance music as well. In fact, this was the first piece of music that he wrote after the Maple Leaf Rag. This is the Swipesy Cakewalk by Scott Joplin and one of his piano students, Arthur Marshall. I know Sunita likes this. I don't know if she's listening yet tonight, but here's the Swipesy Cakewalk. Swipesy Cakewalk. Well, thank you, folks. Let me check all of the streams and make sure they're working tonight. Good deal. Oh, how interesting. Oh, got 93 watchers on YouTube already. That's fantastic. Yes, I'm talking to Leo Roth now. He was telling me he thinks that Swipesy Cakewalk is one of the happiest pieces of music ever written. I imagine that's too. Regina Woodcombe, I'm so glad you're listening tonight. I thought you might enjoy tonight's concert since it's about dance music particularly. Sure miss you. So good to hear from you. And got 2 people on Twitch as well. That's fantastic. Okay, well, let me keep going. If you're new to my concerts, let me know. I sure appreciate all of you listening, and I accept virtual tips for these concerts. All you have to do is send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo. And since I started doing this a little over 2 years ago, I guess it'll be 3 years this spring. It's been very helpful to my career. It's one of the big reasons I keep doing it. Now, of course, I hate to speak ill of the dead, but I would like to discuss a little something that is interesting to me. One of the famed ragtime historians, who was a friend of mine for a number of years, David Jason, passed away last fall. And he wrote in his famous book, Rags and Ragtime, that ragtime music was only a certain type of piece composed for the piano and never dance music. And it is very funny to me because he's completely wrong about that. Ragtime was very, very popular as dance music. And in fact, it tells you right on the cover of the music, even on Scott Joplin's pieces, what kind of dance the music was written for. A one-step, a two-step, a waltz, or what have you. And Dave Jason just kind of kept up that lie. I guess I shouldn't say lie. Forgive the strong language there. I should say he kept up that argument until the day he died. And I'll tell you why. It's because in the 1970s, at the time that he wrote that book, he was trying to get ragtime accepted in the world of classical music and academia. In the 1970s, Scott Joplin became very popular because of the movie The Sting. And that's what that was all about. So, of course, I disagreed with Mr. Jason on that. And I'm going to try and prove it to you by playing all of this great dance music tonight. And the next thing I'm going to play is a true ragtime waltz. And, of course, there were many ragtime waltzes, some more syncopated than others, I suppose. Scott Joplin wrote a number of them. My favorite tonight is... sorry, I'm reading the comments. I'm trying to read comments and discuss music at the same time. It's confuses me sometimes. I just saw that my mother wrote, "Happy to see Adam tonight." We're going to do a true ragtime waltz. Frankly, I like it better than the Joplin waltzes. This is called Echoes from the Snowball Club, written by a black composer from Detroit, Michigan in 1898, way back then. Echoes from the Snowball Club. Thank you so much. That's Echoes from the Snowball Club. Oh, hi, Debbie. I can't believe you were already home in Aztec and tuned on here. Let's see. Well, that is my favorite ragtime waltz. In fact, I used it as the title of my first CD when I was about 13 years old. I don't know why I chose that as the title. I guess I just liked it. Of course, I will play many kinds of music tonight besides ragtime, but I want to discuss that a little bit more. As far as historians are aware, there was never a dance called the rag or the Ragtime Dance. There was nothing like that as far as we know. There may have been, perhaps it was lost to history, but I don't think so. Primarily the dance that was used for traditional ragtime instrumental pieces would have been the two-step. That's probably the most popular one. However, Scott Joplin wrote a piece of music, first in 1902, I believe, is when it was published. Came out as both an instrumental piece and a song. That is a piece with lyrics. And just by coincidence, Mr. Joplin called it the Ragtime Dance. So let me play that for you next. This is the instrumental version, which came out, I think, in 1906. So here we have the Ragtime Dance by Scott Joplin. Thank you very much. The Ragtime Dance by Scott Joplin himself. Oh, that's funny. Leo, stomp, stomp, stomp. This is one of two pieces that Joplin wrote that include a stop time section where you're supposed to stomp your feet. But given that you won't be able to hear it over the live stream on my carpet, I decided not to. Take that, Mr. Jason. There you go, Dave. It's the Ragtime Dance. I'm sure you can talk to Scott about it now and he can tell you the truth. Oh, boy. Don't forget to send in requests tonight, folks. I'll be happy to do them. I got a couple of requests ahead of time before the show that I'm going to try and cover. Let's see. Let me check all the streams, actually, for just a minute. Don't forget to hit the like button on YouTube and Facebook. It helps with the social media algorithms. And also subscribe to me on Twitch. If you enjoy the music, that's going to help me. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers on Twitch. Oh, you know, I forgot. That's interesting. This is Pete on Facebook. Carrie Mills also wrote a piece called The Ragtime Dance. I had forgotten about that. I'd like to play a cute little waltz for you now. Another waltz, just as a curiosity, because again, I'm not going to try and teach you how to do all these dances. You'll have to go to Regina Whitcomb for that. But this is a waltz that was written in the first decade of the 20th century. I forget exactly what year. But it's the only piece of music I have ever seen. Excuse me. Right on the cover of the music, it said three-step. Now, I assume that's a waltz. I don't know what else that could be exactly. But I love this. It's cute. Johnny Maddox used to play it. So did Dick Kreckle. And it's called Moonwinks, a three-step. It's from about 1906 or 1908, something like that. And there's Moonwinks. Thank you very much, folks. Well, I see a couple of requests for Trey Moutard already. I should have dug out the sheet music for that. I'm sorry, you all. I didn't bring out the sheet music, and without that, I can't play the tune. I will do a one-step for you, of course. And but I kind of like to go chronologically through the history of the music. So let me do a tune or two before we do a one-step, and then I'll play you one that I think you'll all really like anyway. Along about 1910, a series of dances became very popular that were all about animals, the animal dances of the ragtime years. And I'm not sure which one was first exactly. I would guess that it would be this tune. The music was written by George Botsford, the lyrics by Irving Berlin, the Grizzly Bear Rag. And there was a dance that went along with this called the Grizzly Bear. I saw some dance instruction at a music festival once where they explained how to do it. And you literally make a face like a grizzly bear. This is about all you do. And this was a very popular tune. Sophie Tucker sang it. And so I'll play the Grizzly Bear Rag for you. I may not be able to do too many of the other animal dances, like the kangaroo hop or the bunny hug, just because I don't know those particular pieces of music by heart. But at least I can give you an example with this one. Yeah, the Grizzly Bear Rag. There's the Grizzly Bear Rag, written by George Botsford, the same man who wrote Black and White Rag and Sailing Down the Chesapeake Bay, a number of other hits. And the lyrics were added by Irving Berlin when he was still quite young and not all that well known. Let's see. The one-step became quite popular during World War I. So I'm going to go chronologically and play another couple of tunes for you, and then we'll get to the tune that I have planned as an example of the one-step. Hey! Bob Mills is listening tonight. So good to hear from you, Bob. I'm going to do a piece. Well, I know Bob's listening. This might be kind of fun. I thought I had an original copy of this, and it turns out I only have a Xerox. Looks like an old copy I made at Johnny's house. And we're going to do an example of a dance that became very popular for some reason in the year 1914. There weren't too many of these tunes, but there were a few. And it was a dance called the half and half. And the reason it was called half and half is because it was in 5/4 time. Now, for those musicians out there like Bob, you know this is a difficult thing to do, to play in 5/4 time. But if you think about it, you can kind of simplify it in your mind. The dance was called half and half because half of it was in 3 and half of it was in 2. That makes 5. And I have played in a previous concert here online, I have played the half and half written by the ragtime composer Joe Jordan. Tonight I'm going to do one composed by F. Henry Clickman, one of the popular writers of the ragtime years. And this was introduced by Vernon and Irene Castle, who became the most popular and famous dancers during the 1910s. Big stars during the ragtime era, especially in New York. Years later, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers made a movie about their lives. And the first time I heard this piece was on a recording of my friend Frederick Hodges, one of my favorite pianists. He recorded this on a CD. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Here's the original cover artwork, and it's called Drawing Room Echoes. Drawing Room Echoes by Henry Klickman. It was introduced by the Castles, the famous dancers, in 1914. Let's see if I can play the tune for you now. In 5/4 time, Drawing Room Echoes, a half and half. You won't hear this down the street tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Crossing my fingers. Thank you very much, everybody. Drawing Room Echoes, half and half, composed by F. Henry Klickman, and as it says on the sheet music, originally created and danced by the Castles. If I had time, I was going to try and dig out somewhere in my binders upstairs. I got an autographed picture of Irene Castle. It's quite a treasure. I think she died way back in the 1920s sometime. Well, let me play one of the other pieces that's on the front of the piano right now. And this is another dance that was associated with one of my very favorite singers and vaudevillians, Blossom Seeley. And unfortunately, she never recorded the song until years later. She was a huge star in vaudeville and got her break in a 1911 Broadway show called The Henpecks, produced by Lou Fields. And I have a number of the original songs from that show. And she introduced a number in that show, which apparently was quite scandalous at the time. And it's called Toddling the Totalo. It became Blossom's theme song. And the Totalo was a dance of the ragtime years, You may have heard U.B. Blake's Baltimore Totalo. He wrote a rag with this dance in the title, and I don't think anybody really knows how to do the Totalo anymore, but apparently it was very scandalous. It was something that Blossom Seeley did, and here's what the original cover artwork from the show looks like. And on music from this period, early Broadway music, you have to look very closely to see what the title of the song actually is. You see, it's down here in the corner. All the songs from the show are listed. This one is Toddlin' the Totalo. And there's a verse and chorus to the tune, and there's actually a third part to this piece of music, which is instrumental, and it says right in the music, dance. Toddlin' the Totalo. It's got great words to it. Music by A. Baldwin Sloan, lyrics by E. Ray Getz. I think he was married into Irving Berlin's family somehow, or I could be wrong about that. He certainly worked with Berlin. From 1911, Toddling the Totalo. Hurry up and play, Adam, I know. Thank you very much. So there's the Totalo, whatever that may be. Since I mentioned Vernon and Irene Castle, maybe we should do the one-step now. Now, this was one of the most popular dances of the ragtime years, and I imagine because it was easy to do. A one-step was just that. One step one way and maybe one step in the other direction. I don't know. I'm not a dancer, but again, ragtime was extremely popular as dance music. And I'm going to pull out a tune here written by the man who is known as the king of the one-step, Mel B. Kaufman. And the Peacherine Ragtime Orchestra has done a wonderful CD of a whole bunch of the music of Mel Kaufman. In fact, I've met his grandson, Roger Kaufman, believe it or not, just last year. And in addition to writing fun music, he was also a ladies' undergarment salesman. That's what he did for a living. This is probably the most popular of all of his tunes from 1918. It's called Meow, a one-step by Mel Kaufman. Meow. Meow! Thank you very much, folks. That's a great one for silent movies. I've never performed that, I don't think, except for silent films. Let's see, I'm checking the comments on YouTube now. I haven't looked there for very long. Oh, yeah. I got a request here from Jim Moritz for King Chanticleer. I might do that for you here in just a minute. Let me do another dance tune of the 1910s, the height of the ragtime era. And this, this is one that was named after the dance. Again, I have no idea how to do the dance, and I wonder whether some of the instructions for the dance moves for these things even survive. I just wonder out of curiosity. 1913, a wonderful African-American songwriter named Chris Smith wrote a tune called Ballin' the Jack, which I have always loved. And I do it as a medley with another tune. Again, I think there was a dance that went along with this. I'm not sure. Written by Shelton Brooks, called Walkin' the Dog. So I'm going to do Ballin' the Jack as a medley with Walkin' the Dog. Here we go. so much. That's Ballin' the Jack. It looked like the YouTube stream kind of got behind here on my computer, so I'm refreshing the page to see if that fixes it. It looks like everyone heard Ballin' the Jack, and it's working fine. Oh, I see Kylan's here on Twitch, posting a bunch of emotes of my face. How funny. Bob says, Meow contained a theme from King Chanticleer. You know, that third part does kind of sound like King Chanticleer. There's a fourth part to King Chanticleer that I've never played. Speaking of which, let's do it now. This was one of the most popular dance numbers of the ragtime years. It came out in 1910. It was written by Nat D. Ayer, who is the man that wrote If You Were the Only Girl in the World and I Was the Only Boy, and Oh You Beautiful Doll. And this is the special arrangement of the song that I worked up to play at Carnegie Hall when I was there. I'm sure people like the Castles dance to this. I'm not sure exactly what dance would have been used. It's funny that I got a couple of requests for this because I was thinking about playing it anyway. Let's do King Chanticleer. you so much, everybody. That's King Chanticleer, one of the great ragtime era songs. Ian Whitcomb recorded it, and he used to sing the words to the tune. You have to do it a little bit slower to sing the words. It's really cute, though. It's all about the King Chanticleer, the King Rooster. Let me see. Oh, Starscream Pierce on YouTube. That's the best arrangement of that I've ever heard. Well, thank you very much. I did work very hard on that. I played that at Carnegie Hall. It's been 11 years ago this month is when I played at Carnegie Hall with Michael Feinstein, who is a musician that I admire very much. I hadn't seen him in a number of years, and I got to see Michael again last summer. He was just as nice as he could be. Don't know Eli Green's Cakewalk by heart. I'm afraid that's a bit of an obscure one. You know, while I'm paused here, let me mention that I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. All you have to do is send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo. The information should be in the postings, including even on Twitch in the chat, and I appreciate it very much. Helps me with my career. It's very difficult to book enough concerts to make a living doing this. One of the only people that's done it entirely on his own without an agent very successfully that I know is Bob Milne. And if you don't trust PayPal, there's a P.O. box on my website for checks too. Some people prefer to do that, and I'm just as grateful. Oh yeah, someone says, I heard the razor blades tag ending on King Chanticleer. That was my mother's idea, believe it or not. And of course, Tom Breyer did not invent that with his ragtime piece, Razor Blades. I believe Frederick Hodges told me that this pianistic device was invented by Franz Liszt. That was invented by Franz Liszt. It's based on the whole tone scale. One hand plays one of the whole tone scales, and the other hand plays the other one. Now, just to change things up, let me do a very different type of music for you. And I thought this would be appropriate because it is very much dance music. I'm going to do a tango for you now. And this is one from the early 1920s, 1923 to be exact. And this was written by a man named Gus Henshin, who was a wonderful composer and band leader from St. Louis, Missouri. And at one time, as a young man, Gus Henshin had taken piano lessons from none other than Scott Joplin. And he wrote this piece, which is probably his most famous composition, under a pseudonym. Why he did that, I have no idea. What a waste of an opportunity there. I think the fake name on the music is something like Paul DuPont. And on one copy of the music, it actually has his real name in parentheses. It's Gus Henshin. And this is a beautiful tango. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it first as a tango, and then I'm going to play it the way they would have done it in the 1920s. Many bands did this. Gus Arnheim's orchestra did this piece in a Vitaphone short, a film short, which I love. I'm going to play it as a Fox Trot. And I haven't mentioned that word yet, but Fox Trot is a term that started in the 1910s and became an almost generic term for any type of music, any popular music that was in duple meter. Almost every record, all the way through World War II. If you see on the 78 record, it says Foxtrot on it. All that means is that you could dance it in 2 or 4, basically. And I believe that the Foxtrot was originally named after the vaudeville star Sam Fox. I'd have to look that up to be sure. But we're going to do now La Rosita as both a tango and a Foxtrot. La Rosita. Thank you very much. My computer's doing something funny tonight. The stream keeps reverting back to like the last song I played. I don't know why, but it looks like everything is looks like it works. Oh, yes, it was Harry Fox. Sorry, not Sam Fox. But there was a piece of music called the Sam Fox Trot. It might have been the music publisher, Sam Fox. Okay, so the vaudevillian Harry Fox is the one that was named after. Well, I saw a lot of requests, both prior to the concert and online tonight, for a tune which I think you will all be familiar with. And this was written by James P. Johnson, who's the father of stride piano. And apparently the tune dates back a number of years before it was actually introduced. About 1912 or 13, James P. Johnson was playing at a nightclub in New York called the Jungle's Inn, or the Jungle's Casino, I believe. And there were a whole bunch of dancers there that had come up from the South. And he wrote a number of tunes that really made a hit with them. And there was one in particular that they just loved. They made him play it over and over and over again. And years later, in 1923, the song was introduced in the Broadway show Runnin' Wild. And Jimmy Johnson named the tune for the town down south where all those dancers had come from, which was Charleston. thank you very much. That's the original Charleston. Pretty close to the way the composer played it on his hand-played QRS piano roll. James P. Johnson. See a request there from Frank for Walking the Dog. Afraid I just played that, Frank, a few minutes ago. Yeah, you know, Leo, I was thinking about playing the Texas Fox Trot tonight. Let's do it. I've got plenty of time for that request. This is an example of how the term foxtrot became a generic term for many kinds of popular music. And this is a very unusual and beautiful rag, written in 1915 by a man named David W. Guion, who was from a little town called Ballinger, Texas, about 30 miles from where my grandfather grew up in Novice, Texas. And David Guion later wrote a lot of American folk music, and he apparently published one of the very first versions of Home on the Range. But anyhow, this is the Texas Foxtrot. You know, he might as well have named it the Texas Rag. That's basically what that means. It was a generic dance term, and so let me go ahead and play the Texas Foxtrot for you now. I have heard records of this. I have an Edison diamond disc of this piece where it's played quite up-tempo. I prefer it a little bit slower. Thank you very much. Texas Fox Trot. Well, let me see. I want to get in at least one more of the popular dances of the 1920s, the jazz age. And in order to do this, I'm actually going to play a medley of songs for you, all from the same Broadway show. Please play the Black Bottom. Guess what? That's the next piece I was planning to play. Well, there was a very popular show in the 1920s. It was kind of similar to the Ziegfeld Follies, called George White's Scandals. George Gershwin wrote for the George White Scandals in the early 1920s. And in 1926, the songwriters were De Silva, Brown, and Henderson. Let's see, that's Buddy De Silva, Lou Brown, and Ray Henderson. One of the great songwriting teams of the 20s. I believe they wrote 5'2", Eyes of Blue. I know the man who wrote the music was Ray Henderson. Anyway, they wrote so much good music for George White Scandals of 1926, I made a medley out of 3 of the songs. We're going to start with Birth of the Blues, and then we're going to do Lucky Day, and finally Black Bottom, which became a very popular dance, somewhat similar to the Charleston in the 1920s. Who was George White? Leo, he was a famous Broadway impresario of the 1920s and later on appeared in a couple of movies. I was just watching the movie Rhapsody in Blue about the life of George Gershwin, and George White himself was in the movie. We're going to do the Black Bottom now, along with a couple of the other tunes from George White's Scandals of 1926. They're not all, the Black Bottom dance, but close enough. Thank you so much. There's a couple of tunes from George White's Scandals of 1926. In fact, I have the original sheet music out here on the piano, and I forgot to show it to you. So here's what the cover art looked like. That's what the sheet music for the original Black Bottom looked like. And of course, that tune and the Charleston, it reminds me of several others that are similar. Tunes like the Varsity Drag or Doin' the Raccoon. I had a request for that, I think, a while back, in which case I could play some of those. So what do you all want to hear? You let me know. I have been reading the chat on YouTube. Let me switch over here to Facebook. Oh, good night, Bob. So good to hear from you. Can't wait to see you in April. Amy, YouTube is suggesting a group called the Adam Swanson Dancers. What in the world does that mean? Well, what do you all want to hear? Do you want to hear Varsity Drag or Collegiate? I don't know that by heart. Let's do the Varsity Drag. This was written for a show, I believe, also by DeSilva, Brown, and Henderson, which was called Good News, 1927 or 28. Later made into a movie, MGM musical. And I even know the verse to the tune. So let's do Varsity Drag. there we go with the Varsity Drag. Thank you, folks. Oh my, Charles says he was in Durango to take the train ride to Silverton, but didn't know about me at that time. Shoot. Well, I am playing at the Diamond Bell here in person, folks. If you want to come visit, it is well worth it. It's a special tourist town of sorts. I think the most beautiful town in Colorado. It's my favorite. There's places like Ouray and Telluride which are close, but Durango's more special to me. But I'm only working there once a week, at least this time of year. Now, I would like some more requests, folks. Send them on in. Jim, I don't know Cecile Waltz by heart. I wish I did. Johnny used to play that. It's quite beautiful. I have a piano roll of that, believe it or not. Let me see. I'm going to wait just a minute for some more requests to come in here, folks. Sometimes I have to wait a minute. There's a slight delay, between when I speak and when I actually see the chat come up on my computer. I don't know the Washington Post March by heart. I don't know that either. Let me check Facebook real quick. Oh, I had forgotten Varsity Drag was in Blazing Saddles. Bob, that's so funny. I'd forgotten about that. Oh, Sue, I don't know Bink's Waltz. I don't know any of the Joplin waltzes. I think that's because I've always loved Echoes from the Snowball Club and have played that so many times. I see a request here from Nick Taylor for, what was it? Oh, Cheek to Cheek. I think this would be very appropriate. Dancing Cheek to Cheek. And in part because this is from one of the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies. Top Hat, music and lyrics by Irving Berlin, 1936 or thereabouts. And of course, Fred Astaire, I think, is one of my favorite stars of all time because he was so multi-talented. He was a dancer, he was a wonderful singer, and a piano player. If you've never seen him play the piano, there's a wonderful scene in the movie Follow the Fleet where he does one chorus of I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. And he was a really good piano player. But now, two songs actually from the movie Top Hat with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. We're going to do Cheek to Cheek and No Strings, I'm Fancy Free. Trying to come up with an introduction for the song. thank you very much. All right, folks. Deborah, she says 137 listeners. Is that on YouTube? If you add up Facebook and Twitch, I think it's in the neighborhood of more like 150 on average lately, which is fantastic. Well, let me finish tonight's concert with a song which I don't play it all that often, but I thought it would be one of the best examples of perhaps the jitterbug era music, which became very popular during World War II. Most of the music I play, at least the music that I love the most, is pre-war music. However, in 1938, Glenn Miller and his orchestra made a record which became probably the most important and successful tune of the big band era. I suppose Chattanooga Choo Choo might be possible exception, but this is In the Mood. And I do it both the way Glenn Miller's orchestra played it and then with a little extra boogie woogie at the end. In the Mood. Thank you so much, everybody. That's In the Mood. Well, I appreciate all of you listening tonight, as always. Got some good numbers here on YouTube, and I thank you very much, especially for the virtual tips. It helps keep my career going. It allows me to take the time I need, several days of preparation for these concerts every week, and I'm most grateful. I'm not 100% sure what my theme for next week's concert will be, but please join me again on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch next Sunday night for another virtual concert. Good night for now, folks.